The gender pay gap, or the difference between how much men and women make for doing the same work, became a political issue in the United States in the 1860s.
Even so, the government's first major act to address this issue wasn't until the Equal Pay Act in 1963.
People today believe the gender pay gap is no longer a thing. However, studies show that they exist in certain fields.
Today, we are having a conversation discussing what we know and what we think about the gender pay gap. I'm Chesh.
I'm Laura,
I'm the Jericho.
and this is Reconfiguring Reality. Chesh, do you even believe the pay gap is a thing?
I do.
Okay.
I actually do think that there is a pay gap between like men and women, and especially when it comes to like your race in regards to all of that. I definitely think that in certain positions, men still make more than women in the same position.
But Jericho doesn't believe that. He doesn't agree with that.
Yes. Then again, I'm addicted to facts, so.
Well, where are you getting your facts?
Well, the gender pay gap that most people quote is from a study that was done, I think it was back in 2013 or 2016. Um, I'm trying to remember what the actual date was, but basically, it was an economic study that polled all the positions, and I believe it was in the US, where they measured what women earn and in all the comprehensive fields that they're currently working, and the same with men. However, what it doesn't tell you in the study is it doesn't tell you what the jobs are, where the pay is coming from. It just takes every job in America basically and says, here's what men earn and here's what women earn. When they calculated it, they came up with this idea that women were earning like 75 cents on the dollar. And this is where all this nonsense started from. And the idea was propagated by people like usually new wave feminists who remember the old days told to them by previous feminists of when women were first entering the workplace and they had to sort of prove their mettle. And as such, very, scrupulous people were, or non-scrupulous people, I should say, excuse me, were out there shortcutting them or blocking them from success or entry because it was, largely a male dominated workplace at the time. So they just were like, no, we don't want females in our workplace and they can't do as good of a job and all that kind of stuff. Not bringing race or inequality and all that kind of stuff in terms of segregation and all other topics that are different, right? So the problem is this study didn't include things like maternity leave or the fact that it averaged every job in America, not accounting for the fact there was huge gaps and disparities in the work individual jobs themselves. So for example, you would say, well, these female across the board are earning less money than men. Well, yeah, but most of the fields that have some of the highest paying positions aren't generally women or fields that women tend to want to go into, or those that are any great number. For example, you see those guys who climb those, uh, you know, uh, the poles where they have to change the lights at the top for, airlines, right? You see those out in fields somewhere where they got these like 300-foot poles. Guys are going out there to do that. Is there a woman working that field? Probably, but you can't say any woman you ever talk to is like, I want to climb that 300-foot pole that takes all day to do to change a light bulb as this whippity tower whips back and forth, right? Or how many female garbage carriers do you see? Are there some? Sure, I've seen them in my lifetime, but I can tell you, I can count on one hand the number I've seen compared to the number of men, right? How many female bricklayers do you see? How many female welders do you see? How many bomb disposal females do you see? Do they exist? Sure, now more than ever. But the problem is when you account things like maternity leave and time to take away for taking care of their families and other things like that, they aren't earning as much as men. The study didn't differentiate anything about that. It just stated that men earned more than women, not equally earned men, earned more, or like in the same job, men earned more. It just calculated all the numbers together. And
So
that's
would
why it was debunked and proven false because it doesn't take into account the facts of the situation. It's like saying America's broke because we have people unemployed. And you look at all these homeless people and you look at all this stuff and say, we're broke. No, we're the richest country in the world. But if you were to take a very small segregation of the populace and say, look at all these homeless people, right, but that's not the average American is a homeless person, right? So that's essentially what happened. But people find it easier to blame a rumor than it is to believe the truth that women, large and by, have had much more success, especially within the last, I'd say, 30 to 40 years. They're graduating at higher rates from college.
but you
They're
also
holding more
said
positions. They're holding equal positions. And the fact that the social media and cancel culture we live in, do you like it's preposterous to think that a woman could be in a position like a high profile position, right? Like a VP or something, and she is drastically earning less than her male counterpart.
but then
Who
you said to me that I was wrong, or maybe not wrong, but when I had said that, you know, I was in a position for several years, and the new guys coming into that same position with less experience than me were making more money than me. And you said that I can't base the gender pay gap on my personal experience for that one
alone, correct.
employer.
Right. Exactly. Like in my profession, I knew women who made more than me, and I've known women or and men who've made less than me. At my position that I was into, my not last position, but the previous one before that, I was earning twice what the rest of my team was earning. I outpaced them by a wide margin, but we were effectively doing the same job. I was just doing it better at a higher volume than they were. But when the work started to get distributed more, we were all equal pay, which is why when COVID came around, it was easy to let me go because they're paying me twice as much for the same amount of work, right? It didn't make sense. So the problem is though, is that no matter what way you slice it, even if you believe the study to be true, or if you know, don't have a laundry list of, you know, stats sitting in front of you, just take it from a logical standpoint. If men or women or whoever's in power can hire women at 75 cents on the dollar, why don't you see women working all these fields? Why don't they just fire the men and hire the women, or keep around a cadre of men to look like affirmative actions in place and that equal opportunity exists, and just primarily make your work staff women? Because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't exist. And if women were equal in all ways to men in all fields, then why aren't they working in all fields? If women want true equality and they think that there is some sort of, barrier to their entry or to their pay, why aren't there more women out there doing the grungy jobs, not just administrative jobs, not office jobs, not, they want to be CEOs, they want to be billionaires, but they don't want to do anything that actually props up society. Well, that's because most women don't want to work and sweat and toil the way men do in society. So when a man gets paid more money because he's willing to put in 18-hour days, backbreaking labor, pouring concrete all day, are there women who do it? Yes, there are. I've seen them, but they are the minority in that field. There is not a 50-50 share. And that's just women's choice. That has nothing to do with men keeping them out of the field. I guarantee you, if a woman could haul the same amount of lumber or the same amount of pour the same concrete with the same accuracy and do the same job, they're going to hire her. But the facts of the situation are is that women don't want those fields. They don't want those jobs. And as such, they say, well, we're just, men earn more than us. Well, there's other factors to consider. I know, like, I work in call centers. Lots of women work in call centers. I knew women who made more than I did, and they did a terrible job by comparison. My numbers were stronger, my reviews were stronger, my customer feedback was stronger, but because I was a man, right? You know, I just was perceived to, this isn't really your job. I'd always get asked questions like, well, what do you really want to do with your career? What do you want to see yourself, right? Like if I was saying I was happy to be where I'm at, I was seen as not being ambitious enough,
And
right?
you were paid less than the women?
Yeah,
Is
many of
that
the
not a
women,
gender pay gap?
it's not the gender pay gap that people subscribe to. If you were to ask the general populace, even ask the people that we know, do you think there's a gender pay gap where men are getting paid less than women? They would laugh at you. They would be like, uh-huh, sure, yeah, that's happening. In fact, the answer you'd probably get is they would be like, no, it's the opposite. Of course, men are always getting paid more than women because that's the narrative that women have been sold and this lie that has been propagated. It's untrue. It doesn't exist anywhere in the books. And again, we live in a culture where everything is out there in the open. If you could cause like CEOs and companies to fall and people to get fired because they misgendered you, do you honestly think that a person, or let's take it one step further, a person of color and a person of alternative gender or sexual uh, choice, right, was discriminated against? Do you think for 1 second that wouldn't be wildfire on the media? They wouldn't even have to be true. If they just spread a rumor that they were infringed upon in such a way, it would explode. So how do we believe that there's this secret cadre of men somehow keeping women down? And if that's the case, how are women as wealthy as they are? How are women affording the things that they do and carrying the careers that they are?
Because we rely on men. Duh.
Right. So if that's it, right? That men
Because
have just snowballed
because
women
we
into
don't make
believing,
enough. Now, look, no, I'm looking at an article here from bankrate.com. Okay.
Mhm.
And it says that um, this article was written in 2024. And it says that they looked at the gender pay gap across more than 25 industries and found that the pay gap was largest in the finance and insurance industries.
Mhm.
And they have other industries like professional, scientific, and tech- technological services, management of companies and enterprises, and healthcare and social assistance. Those are all where the largest pay gaps are. It also does have construction in here, with only 10% of the population, of the work population, being female workers. And obviously, if they're getting paid 89 cents on the dollar for men, why aren't they hiring more women? Because men can do the job better. Obviously, they were built to do it. But
And yet you still see them pushing for inclusion and equality when equality of opportunity is not the same thing as equality of output, right? No one's
mm-hmm.
keeping women away from jobs, but in some people's opinion, they should. And I'll tell you why they think this is, like, for example, if you talk about somebody who can't do the job better, right? I can't think of more than a handful of women in my lifetime who I've seen that even come close to being physically dominant as men are. So why would we want a 5'5" female firefighter who weighs like 100 pounds soaking wet?
why do men make more in the real estate business?
Because they're more aggressive. Every woman I've ever known who's successful at business, and by business, this is a broad term, I know I'm saying, but anybody who's has a field where you're making money, not just as a job, but like your profession is transactional, right? Like you're selling homes, you're selling products, you're in sales, you're in marketing, you're in anything that has to do with the flow and culture of money growth. anytime you see a woman who's successful in that, they are not a timid woman. They are not a woman who's reserved. They're women who are go-getters. They're known to be sharks. They're known to be extremely competitive. They're known to be goal-driven and incentive-driven. They're the opposite of what a typical woman is known to have for behavior traits. It's not to say a woman can't have those things in some moderation, but we're not talking about moderation, right? We're talking about the extreme polars. When you see men, men are that. They're overachievers. They're out there. They're willing to cut throats. They're willing to do whatever they need to do to succeed. Failure is not an option. There are women who have that same mentality, but there are far fewer women that do that compared to men. This largely has to do with societal growth and things like that. For example, in other countries, say like Morocco or in India, you don't necessarily, you may have the strong work ethic, but you don't have that same go, 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 drive, drive, drive that we have here in the West. So the culture is different and men are more relaxed, although still hardworking. They're not necessarily driven to the extreme as they are here, right? America is really good at taking something that is normal, but mundane and then cranking it to 11.
Here's
So,
here's something for you. In the healthcare social workers,
mhm.
there is a gender pay gap, but it's in favor of the women.
Yeah, because they're seen as being more maternal. They're seeing as being more compassionate. And again, largely that's the case. If you talk to nurses, right, and you look at nurses and how they interact with people outside of the cheeky ones we see on comedy shows and things like that, most nurses aren't prickly characters. Now, if they work in a high stress environment, they may not be the friendliest person either, but they are extremely hardworking, but at the same time, they're extremely compassionate. Whereas most doctors are known to be very standoffish and have a poor bedside manner. It's not that all doctors do, and it's not that that hasn't changed over the years, but men being, innately compassionate and sensitive are outside of the norms of what men usually are raised to be.
I will say that I've met a female with a really bad
Well, they
bedside manner
exist.
as a doctor.
Well, yeah,
I've
but
met a
Chest,
few
that's
myself, yeah.
but
chest.
that's my point is that we're talking about minorities versus majorities, right? And this is where the argument sort of always devolves with a lot of people. Not saying it is with you guys. But when people get in these sort of arguments and they're trying to find the truth of a scenario, the truth of these situations are often very nuanced.
But the truth of the matter is that they do have proof that in some fields there is a gender pay gap.
Yes, but you also have to look at the nuance of those gaps. They don't just say, "Hey, you're a man, so you earn $1 less because you're a nurse." It doesn't work that way. Nurses get paid the same. However, the things that lead most of them to being a good worker or a bad worker is individualized. Because there are more women in a field than there are men, statistically, they will have higher pay. That doesn't mean that it's an actual gap generated by inequality or a lack of opportunity. It's simply because there are less men in the field. So you have less numbers to draw upon. For example, if you only have, say, 1,000 nurses for every 10,000 female nurses, then you're going to see gaps in pay because you're going to have lifers on both sides. But if you figure, say, even half of all nurses make it to, not there's so many fields you can go as a nurse, but let's just say we go for the big ticket, right? You become an RN and you want to put in your lifetime as a nurse. If we say both half men and half women reach that goal, that means there's 500 men and 5,000 women. Now, again, with that many women, the numbers of raises, opportunities, and things are going to be in their favor. Therefore, if a man and woman are equal in their ability to care for somebody, but the preference tends to lie in females simply because of their numbers, then you're going to see those numbers affect the overall ability to earn. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily better or worse. It just means that they statistically are going to have higher percentages, right?
I don't
Like,
know. I'm looking at data here, and in the finance and insurance industry, it's 45% male to 54% female, and the
mhm.
females are still getting paid less than the men.
So in that case, if you have a statistical difference, right, then there must be other factors at play. So does that percentage include how many of them are single versus how many of them
Uh,
are married or
it's information from the Census Bureau from 2022 American Community Survey. 1 year estimates for full time year round workers 16 years or older. And it was adjusted for inflation.
okay. So that right there could be a big difference. Not a lot of women choose to work when they're in high school. If they do, they're not working serious career type
It
jobs. They're
doesn't
usually
matter. It doesn't matter. It's still 45% men to 54% female.
right, but it does matter because if you're calculating potential earning growth, if women don't start their careers until 4 years later than men, men already have 4 years worth of more growth in capital than the females. So it does matter. That's like saying if you and I are both trying to build a boat and I have a 4 day head start, that we're equal because you simply, chose to have more friends on your side than mine, then we're not
Yeah,
equal.
but how
I
can you
have 4 days
prove
ahead
that?
of you.
How can you prove that the males aren't the ones right out of high school and the women have more experience?
Well, that's because statistically, more men work more jobs at an earlier age than women do. It doesn't mean that women don't work, but the fields they're working in are different. And usually, when you're talking about entry level position, they're the more laborious of those positions. So if you're talking about in terms of finance jobs, there's internships, but there's also what they call door knocker positions.
That the both male and females have to go through.
Right.
Before we run out of time, because we are running out of time, I want to hear Chesh's thoughts on this.
I don't, I mean, you both have shown, I mean, I gave mine at the beginning of this. Like, I think there is one, especially in places where, again, like you guys have said, nursing is usually female dominated. So, yes, nurses are going to make more than probably their male counterpart. Like, everything you guys have pretty much said is, it makes sense. Like, I don't have a difference of opinion in regards to like you, Laura.
When you were working in that lawyer's office, Chesh,
Mm-hmm.
was the pay equal? Do
I
you
have no
know?
idea.
Yeah,
I
because
don't know. Well, because the
companies tell you that you're not allowed to discuss your pay
yeah,
rates,
which is complete bullshit, and you are.
and it's illegal
But
for them to do that, isn't it?
it is illegal for them to sit there and tell you that you can't discuss it when everybody sits and discusses their fucking pay. It's just the person next to me. I was the only one in the position that I was in.
Gotcha,
I was a very specific role for the two attorneys that I worked for.
gotcha, gotcha.
Because a lot of the other, and majority of it was girls. We did have some men, but a majority of the staff besides the lawyers were women. Um, a lot of the lawyers were male. We did have some female lawyers, but the position that I was in for other departments was usually covered by somebody else who was also doing another person's job.
Gotcha.
It's just I had two people, so I was, handling two people's schedules, which is pertained to one job. And then I mean, I've also done private nannying, and from what I've seen in regards to private nannying is it's female dominated.
Yes.
Jericho's
Yeah,
said
and I
it
think
before.
that's
It's a maternal thing, and most people trust women around children.
yeah. Most people don't trust men around children, which I can see why you're skeptical. But there are some good guys out there that can be great
Hmm.
caregivers.
So I mean, I do think there is a pay gap, whether it's in regards to gender, ethnicity, whatever. Um, I think it depends on where you are and who you work for.
Hmm.
Jericho gave some great examples of very male dominated fields. You gave great examples of very high female dominated fields. Um,
And we haven't even touched on race.
oh yeah, no, we haven't touched
Well,
on
then you're
that at
getting outside
all.
of gender, right? You're changing the question
Right,
at that point.
right. But I mean, there's studies that show that uh, African American women make less than white women, so therefore they make less than white men, and the gap is bigger if you bring in the ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be it for today's podcast.
All right.
Don't forget to comment, get involved in the conversation. Let's talk about this.
Make sure you like and you share.
Subscribe. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Later. And don't forget, platinum tier on the only feed accounts. You'll get not one but three female host picks. It's fantastic.
Only feed account.